Hello and welcome to today's episode of Dream Business, Dream Life. Today I thought it would be a good idea to tell you a little bit more about me, to tell you a little bit more about my journey. After all, you're going to have the pleasure of listening to my voice a lot. So I thought probably a good idea for you to know a little bit more about the person behind the voice. But where do I begin? So I was born on August the 29th, 1970. Only kidding. This won't be a biography. I just want to share with you the bits that really matter, the bits that will help you to understand where I've been, why I do what I do with such passion, and where I am right now. But before I do, I want to make you aware that my story does include mention of suicide and death. So please feel free to skip this episode if that may cause you any distress. Now, I want to start today's episode with a quote. You will never make anything of yourself. That is something that I was told by a teacher when I was about 14 years old. Now, okay, I wasn't the best behaved student and studying wasn't top of my priority list, but it was still pretty cruel, right? And I now realise that those small 7 words played a huge part in the next 30-ish years of my life. Because unbeknown to me at the time, that statement had set a thought in my mind that basically said, whatever the cost, I am going to make something of myself. I'm going to prove that teacher wrong. So life continues. I meet Adrian, my now hubby, and at 16, I become a mum, welcoming the first of my 3 amazing daughters, Becky, into the world. Now, I imagine at this point, the teacher is thinking, I told you so. I knew she'd be the one. But you know what? I honestly believe that meeting Adrian and becoming a mum at that point in my life was the best thing that could have happened to me. Now, of course, I'm not advocating becoming a mum at 16. It was hard work. But for me, it was absolutely the best thing that could have happened to me. I was 18 when I started my first proper job. I'd done a little bit of Saturday work in a knicker shop, but my first proper job, I was 18. It was an admin role at one of the UK's largest building societies, which at the time had its head office in my local town. I loved the job. The next 14 years absolutely flew by. I worked my way up the career ladder, and by the time I left that job in 2008, I was the sales and regulatory change manager. What a great title. Corporates love a great title, don't they? Basically, what that meant is I was responsible for the processes and regulation across the entire branch network and the direct sales channel, which basically meant I managed a team of project managers and I went to lots of meetings. Now, I was never unhappy at Britannia. The people I worked with were mostly lovely. And I gained a great load of wealth, a great load of business experience. But despite having a lot of control over how my team operated, I always felt stifled by the red tape, the office politics. Trying to get anything signed off was so hard because there were so many loops you had to go through. I hated having to ask for a day off, and I hated the mundaneness of the same routine day in and day out. So in 2006, I say we, that's me and my hubby, we set up our e-commerce business. We were determined to create a business that gave us freedom. The dream at the time was to move to Spain or to at least spend loads of time there. The dream was clear. We were going to have lots of freedom to do what we wanted to do. But as with anybody, or most people that start a new business, the first priority was about getting the business to a position where I could leave my corporate job. At the time, I was the main breadwinner in the house, and by now we had 3 daughters, so stability was really important. We needed to maintain that financial stability. But beyond that, once we'd got to that point, it was about creating the life of freedom that we both long for. It was about creating a life that meant we could spend as much time in Spain as we wanted to. And after 2 years, it happened. I resigned from my job. And so now was the time to shine. Now was the time to ultimately stick two fingers up to that teacher. But first, we needed to get the business to a point where it was giving us the lifestyle, because for now it was just replacing the salary. So the years go by, the business grows. We work a little harder each time to push it to the next milestone until it finally tips that 7-figure mark. We finally have a year where we're turning over in excess of £1 million. Now, surely that should have been a celebration. Surely now I've made something of myself. Surely now I feel successful, as it takes a lot to grow a business from absolutely nothing to 7 figures in such a short space of time. But to me, it wasn't a celebration. I didn't feel happy and I didn't feel proud. I felt exhausted. I absolutely hated my business. And deep down, if somebody had really asked me the honest question, I would have swapped that business for a much simpler lifestyle at the drop of a hat. But I didn't. I still kept on pushing and pushing until eventually I reached breaking point. I started the business for freedom. I wanted a less mundane life. I wanted to live in Spain, and I wanted to be proud of what I had. I wanted a legacy for my children. I wanted to be able to feel like I was somebody. Well, none of that happened. All my focus had gone on growing the business. I was working 80 to 90 hours per week. And it sort of felt like the children had to book an appointment with me in order to see me. This was not what I wanted. This was not what I left my corporate job to create. When I went on holiday, I took my laptop with me. I went on some amazing holidays, but my laptop was always there and I was always sat working at it. I only ever had Christmas Day off. That was the only full day I ever took off. And I say full day. Even then, I'd sneakily check my emails before the kids woke up. The freedom I so desperately longed for couldn't be further away from the reality that I had created. I hated my life and I absolutely hated my business. But you know what the really sad part was? I hated me too. Because in my mind, I was a bad mum. I was a bad wife. And I was sure as hell a bad businesswoman. I'd created a monster business. Life for me right now could not be further away from the dream. In December 2010, we were in Christmas peak. It was always crazy, crazy busy at Christmas, working even longer hours than long hours. And there was no time for anything beyond work. Our youngest daughter, Emily, who was 8 at the time, ended up in hospital with a broken femur. And at the time, I think our initial reaction was, okay, we'll get her plastered up, we'll get her home, and then we'll make this happen. We'll work this out. Sadly, it wasn't that simple. They discovered that little Emily had a cyst in her bone, and that resulted in her having lots of tests, scans, and surgery. It was going to be a long stay in hospital, and it was going to be a really long road to recovery for little Emily. Now, of course, absolutely, there was no doubt that our priority here was Emily. She was such a brave little girl, and there was no way I was going to leave her side. But we had invested a lot of money in stock, and that stock had to be sold. And December was our last chance to do this because it was Christmas stock. We had staff, we had bills that needed to be paid. So one way or another, we had to find a way to make this happen. We had to make sure this stock was sold. Bear in mind, in a 6-week period, probably not even quite 6 weeks, in November and December, we sold more in those 6 weeks than we sold the rest of the year. So the stock level at this point was really high. But we had to do something. So we did what we do best. We worked even harder. Now, Adrian was an absolute rock. He was the one in the warehouse from like really early in the morning until really late at night, rushing over to the hospital in the snow. I mean, you couldn't make this up, in the snow, just to spend an hour with me and Emily. And then he'd have to rush back to the warehouse. I was trying so hard to deal with the admin as best I could from Emily's bedside. But back in 2010, It was really hard, as the internet was pretty crap back then, especially inside a hospital ward. I don't know if you've ever tried that. Now, my other two daughters, Becky and Charl, they were a little bit older and they were absolutely amazing, but this was hard on them too. They basically had to fend for themselves. So, over the next few weeks, it really reinforced to me that our business was not giving us any freedom. Never in our lives had we been so tied to something as we were right there, right in that moment. I could see it, but I didn't admit it. I didn't say it, but I knew it. I knew we'd created a monster. From that point onwards, life was a bit of a downward spiral for me. My time in hospital with Emily had given me time to really subconsciously assess our lives, to really reflect on this monster that we had created. And it had given me time to sit and watch our lives in slow motion. Seeing Adrian working so hard and seeing the children having to fend for themselves was literally heartbreaking. But instead of taking action, instead of taking this opportunity, this moment of realization to do something about it, to make the changes that we needed to make, we just pushed on even harder. And what happened is the harder the work that we seemed to work, the more money that we seemed to make. And then maybe, just maybe, if we kept pushing, eventually it would all pay off. And this freedom that we desired, this freedom that we wanted so, so much would happen. It would become reality. This was me just waiting for the magic. This was me thinking it would get better once we got there. But where is there? Where was I going? So by now we've bought a villa in Spain. We're driving around in some pretty swish cars, some amazing holidays with my laptop, of course. And at this point, life has become pretty materialistic. I was trying to convince myself that the next expensive purchase would make everything better. The next thing that I bought would be the thing that would make me realize that, it was okay. But of course, it never did. So what did I do? I found a way to drown out the pain. I turned to alcohol. And I consumed lots of it. So by now, not only am I happy, miserable, obsessed with spending and doing everything I can to avoid people, I'm also drinking excessively. Clearly, a car crash waiting to happen. And of course, over time, it gets out of control. I become a pretty horrible person, drunk most of the time and pretty nasty. Now, I'm not justifying it at all. How I behaved was completely wrong, but it was all because I was lost. I had no idea who I was or what I wanted. I just knew that what I had wasn't it. I absolutely loved my family. I loved them dearly with every bone in my body. But in my mind, I had completely failed them. And I thought they deserved better than this. Their life would be so much better if I was no longer here. Their life would be so much better if they didn't have to put up with me. So I spent time over months and months planning my own suicide. I worked out lots of different ways that I could potentially take myself out of the mix. What if I accidentally fell off the bridge down the road by the canal? What if I slipped and fell into the road as a wagon drove past? Then one evening, I decided it was time. So I sat with my wine and my pills and I started to swallow them one by one. Now, on that day, the universe was clearly looking out for me because before I was able to swallow many of the pills, my hubby walked into the room. Now, it was the early hours of the morning. So why he decided to come downstairs at that moment, I honestly don't know, but he did. And in that moment, unbeknown to him, he completely saved my life. Now, I'm not sure at what point I started to feel like a stronger person, but in 2020, after dealing with the unexpected spike that COVID brought to the world and brought to our e-commerce business, I knew it was time for something to change. I knew I had to stop pretending to be okay. And I knew that it was time to start being stronger. It was time to make a change. It was time to no longer pretend that the world was great, no longer pretend that my business was great. So into 2021, over 10 years after I realized that I was unhappy, we came armed with a new plan. A plan that was no longer driven by profit, but driven by freedom. A plan that would give us back some of the time and enable us to become a little bit freer from the ball and chain that we'd grown. It took about 3 months to implement that plan, but it worked. The working hours reduced crazily, literally went from sort of working 80 to 90 hours a week to working maximum, 15 at the absolute most. So the business is tamed. But then what? Now it's time I say this is when the real work started. The business was tamed, but I knew that it had to go at some point. I knew that it was, for now it would just tick away in the background, but I knew at some point it had to go. But now the real work started because now it was time to blow the dust off my dream. And now it was time to actually start making that dream my reality. So I spent a lot of time and money investing heavily in me and really exploring what success looked like to me. And once I had that dream clear in my mind, then I was able to start going about making it happen. Of course, it wasn't going to happen overnight. I was very scarred. I had a lot of scars that needed to heal, but I was determined that I was going to enjoy the journey this time. I was determined that this time it was about the today, not the tomorrow. Now, it took me a couple of years to get clarity on how I would help people. I knew I wanted to help people to be happy in business, but it took me a while to work out the how. I remember back in 2021, I think it would have been probably towards the end of 2021, somebody said to me, one of my mentors at the time said to me, "What is it you want to do?" And I just said, "I just want to help people to be happy." That hasn't changed. All that's changed is I've got a lot more clarity around the how. Eventually, 2023 this is it. This is the year. I was feeling so much stronger. I could finally say I was happy and I was enjoying life. Yes, there was still a long way to go to be living the dream, but I was enjoying the journey. Then we were hit with the worst news anyone wanted to hear. My beautiful 31-year-old daughter, Becky, deep breath here, Emma, was diagnosed with secondary liver cancer. Now, Becky was the strongest person you could ever meet. She fought it hard for 6 weeks, but sadly, she was just too poorly to beat it. And suddenly, the happiness that we'd started to find slipped away once again. As a family, at this point, we were totally broken. Now, it's just over 12 months ago since we lost Becky, and the pain is just as strong today. In some ways, that pain may even be stronger. But despite the emotion and despite the sadness, I eventually realised that I had to keep going. I could not allow my mental health to spiral out of control again. I had to be more Becky. I had to be strong. So I turned my sadness into my strength. And I came back into my business even stronger. More determined than ever to not only live my dream life, but to help others live theirs too. 2023 showed me that wow, life is precious. And for as long as we have breath in our body, we absolutely can have it all. Now, I feel like I need to raise the vibration here a little, as I know my story, as are so many other people's stories, is packed full of heartbreak and sadness. But it's also packed full of experience and learning. Experience and learning that has made me the person I am today. Experience and learning that I'm able to share to help others. Today, I am super passionate about helping others to grow a business they love. And as a certified business strategist with a whole heap of experience under my belt, I have all of the skills to make that possible. If I hadn't had the heartache and sadness in my life, I wouldn't be able to do some of this stuff today. So, as you listen to more episodes of this podcast, you are going to learn that I'm a big advocate for living life to the full, for having fun, and for being totally transparent. You will also learn that I love being amongst people, and I love a glass of wine. I love a margarita pizza, and I love being in the sun, especially the Spanish sun. But most importantly, you will learn that you too can have your dream business and your dream life. Thank you for listening to my story. See you next time.